Chess isn't for people like you. A sneer followed as Emily Walker entered the tournament hall, pale gray shirt, plastic-framed glasses, and a frayed canvas bag at her side. A female grandmaster looked her up and down and said, "If this is a joke, it's not a very funny one." Emily simply nodded politely and took the last seat in the room. What happened next would feel to many like a brilliant, terrible dream. She set her bag on the floor and reached up to adjust her glasses. A staff member in a crisp black polo stared at the scratch on her left lens, then cast a quick, incredulous glance at her worn-out sneakers. This was the National Professional Chess Championship in Chicago, a place where serious contenders arrived in tailored suits or sponsor-branded jackets. By contrast, Emily's plain attire along with her quiet demeanor triggered an almost reflexive disdain. One young player leaning against the registration desk smirked and whispered to a friend, "Maybe she's here to serve coffee or clean the boards." The friend let out a muffled laugh. A referee overheard pursed his lips and said nothing. There was a certain tension in the air anytime an unknown name appeared in the bracket. People liked their chess heroes predictable, and Emily didn't fit any mold. Several steps away, a well-known American grandmaster, a man in his 40s known for flamboyant opening lines and an even more flamboyant ego, finished talking to the tournament organizer. He caught a glimpse of Emily, took note of her cheap plastic glasses, and turned toward the cluster of staff behind him. "If she's sitting in the wrong chair," he said in a half-joking, half-serious tone, "I'd be happy to swap her to the spectator section." A faint ripple of laughter spread among those who heard. Emily inclined her head slightly, almost like a small bow, but said nothing. The Grandmaster narrowed his eyes, clearly expecting a reaction, then shrugged as he moved on. The interior of the tournament hall radiated with bright overhead lighting that glinted off the polished wooden boards. Rows upon rows of them stretched across the floor, each accompanied by a pair of chairs and a digital clock, the heavy hush occasionally punctured by the squeak of shoes or the rustle of jackets. Emily walked along the central aisle, her footsteps so unremarkable that they seemed swallowed by the grandness of it all. Spectators, journalists, and seasoned players clustered around certain boards, particularly those featuring marquee matchups. But when Emily approached the farthest corner, labeled Board 18, only a handful of onlookers even bothered to glance her way. One, a local Chicago champion wearing a custom jacket embroidered with his name, gave her a quick once-over and grinned dismissively. "Are you sure you belong here?" he asked. His tone was not hostile, just laced with condescending amusement. Emily responded with a polite nod, placed her bag on the floor, and sat. Another staffer strolled by, collecting registration slips. He paused at Emily's table to recheck her ID card, looking perplexed when her name didn't ring a bell. He shrugged as if deciding there must be some last-minute quirk in the bracket, and continued down the line. The overhead speakers crackled, signaling that the first round would begin in 2 minutes. A mild commotion erupted elsewhere in the hall as a teenage sensation arrived to fanfare. No one announced Emily's presence. No cameras turned in her direction. When the buzzer finally sounded, Emily's first opponent, a lean man with slicked-back hair, set his pieces on the board. His rooks, knights, and bishops were custom-made, each piece finely polished. He revealed a slight smirk when he noticed Emily using the plain house set, her gaze drifting between it and a battered notation booklet she'd pulled from her bag. "Don't blink," the man said under his breath, loud enough for her to hear. As the digital clock's display flicked from 000 to the official countdown, he advanced a central pawn with force. Nearby, a few spectators observed the opening moves, then wandered off, apparently finding more interesting matches to watch. Emily's moves were slow, almost hesitant. By her third turn, the man had established a confident attacking structure, and by his fifth, he was leaning forward with an almost predatory expression. Still, Emily said nothing, her features calm. She moved a knight to a square that most players would consider too passive for an early game. The local champion's smirk grew. "That's not how you develop," he remarked, more to the air than to her. With a flourish, he moved his queen out early, clearly aiming for a quick, punishing strike. An older spectator ambled by, took one look at Emily's cramped position, and whispered to a friend, "She won't last 10 moves." The friend nodded in agreement. Even the staffer who had teased her earlier strolled past with a self-satisfied grin, no doubt expecting to see her downfall. But then on Emily's 8th move, she pushed a small pawn that subtly cut off her opponent's diagonal. The local champion blinked. He made an aggressive retort only to realize he'd left one of his knights undefended. Emily captured it in a series of forcing moves that led to an unexpected pin on his rook. She didn't look triumphant, she merely noted it press the clock and watched him scramble. In less than 10 more moves, he found himself without any way to salvage his position. His queen was pinned to a bishop his rook threatened, and his advanced pawns suddenly worthless. Gaping, he resigned. Several curious onlookers frowned, double-checking the position. Emily's expression never changed. She accepted. His brief handshake, bowed her head again, and quietly recorded the final move on her notepad. The local champion sat there in stunned silence as she slipped away. Word drifted through the hall in uncertain whispers the unknown woman at board 18 had won. A staff member repeated the rumor to the American Grandmaster, who waved it off as a fluke. Another official peered at the bracket and rolled his eyes. She must have caught him on an off day, he muttered. Meanwhile, Emily slipped into a side corridor lined with framed portraits of past national champions. She paused at one photograph, a teenage girl, maybe 14, holding a trophy. The plaque read, Youth Champion. The date was more than a decade ago, and the face in the picture was too faint for easy recognition. She gazed at it for a moment, then moved on when footsteps sounded behind her. Round 2 arrived soon after the lunch break. Emily's next opponent was a rising West Coast star known for flamboyant attacks. He strutted to the board with 2 friends in tow, making jokes about how easily he would wipe out rookies. Emily gave a slight nod of greeting as he sat down, his sponsor-labeled jacket pristine under the fluorescent lights. He opened aggressively, pushing his pawns to claim the center. She responded with small, unremarkable moves, letting him expand. The watchers whispered that she was even slower this time, more passive. The star's face gleamed with confidence. By move 12, he had a bishop on a strong diagonal and a rook lined up to pounce. On move 15, Emily nudged a single pawn that quietly undermined his entire structure. He tried to lash out with a sacrificial thrust, hoping to rattle her. She accepted the sacrifice, pivoted her knights, and locked his queen in a precarious bind. A hush fell as he sank into thought, face reddening. 5 moves later, he resigned, blinking in confusion. Now more people began to notice. A few of the teenage prodigies who had snickered at Emily's first appearance exchanged uncertain glances. One looked at the bracket, saw her name moving upward, and tapped a companion on the shoulder. The American Grandmaster from earlier heard a staffer mention Emily's second win. He arched an eyebrow but said nothing, returning to his own match. Another staff member, the one who had poured tea and joked that she'd be gone after round 1, glanced at her in the hallway and quickly looked away. The tension thickened, though no one was ready to call her a serious contender. They must be weaker players, a bystander insisted. She'll fold when she meets real competition. Emily, for her part, rested in a small lounge area near a vending machine. She laid her frayed canvas bag on a nearby chair and opened a worn puzzle book. Occasional footsteps passed, heads craning to see if she'd reveal anything. She simply turned pages, sometimes pausing on a puzzle diagram. A man with silver hair, presumably a coach or manager for someone else, paused nearby and cleared his throat. He seemed on the verge of asking her something, but she gave a polite half-smile, and he walked on. She kept the puzzle book balanced in her lap, scanning a particularly tricky position. No sense of triumph marred her features. No boastful look hinted that she had already toppled 2 strong competitors. It was as if each game was just another quiet step in a long journey. Round 3 pitted her against an international master who had graced the cover of chess magazines more than once. He arrived with fans trailing behind, eager to watch him demolish what they perceived as a lucky novice. 1 or 2 recognized Emily from the bracket updates but shrugged it off as an impending mismatch. The international master greeted her with a crisp handshake and a thin-lipped smile. "Don't take it personally," he whispered, "but I play to win quickly." She bowed her head, adjusting her glasses. The clock started, and he unleashed a dynamic opening that gained immediate momentum in the center. Onlookers marveled at his fluid development. By move 8, he looked poised to break open her defenses. Emily's response was again slow pawns, creeping forward, knights occupying subdued squares. A pair of journalists strolled by, capturing photos. One sneered quietly, remarking that Emily's approach looked naive. Then, as the position shifted, her rooks lined up in a way that cut across the international master's strategic plan. He attempted a flashy bishop sacrifice, convinced that it would tear her position apart. She parried it with a single queen move that not only negated his threat but set up a pin on his knight. A hush of disbelief spread among the watchers. The international master's face tightened. He tried to salvage the sacrifice with an emergency maneuver, but Emily hopped her knight to an outpost that threatened multiple pieces at once. In a flurry of forced moves, she dismantled his entire center. Checkmate came soon after. Gasps rippled around them. The international master sat motionless, fingers drumming on the table as though he couldn't believe it. Emily offered a small nod, wrote the final move, and left. At this point, onlookers could no longer dismiss her as a fluke. 3 formidable opponents had fallen. Word traveled quickly among the staff players and even the small cluster of local spectators. A few rumors began to swirl. Perhaps she was a retired legend or an overseas teacher, or maybe it was all an elaborate hoax. Some even whispered about cheating, though no one saw any signs, no earpieces, no Confederates lurking behind her board. A referee discreetly monitored her during the next match for suspicious activity. Nothing suspicious surfaced. She merely studied the board with unwavering calm. The result was the same in round 4. Her opponent, a flamboyant champion who loved complicated sacrificial lines, tried to unbalance her from the outset. She sidestepped each trap, letting him blow all his resources in a misguided cavalry charge. Then she systematically picked off his pieces. When he realized his king was trapped behind his own pawns, he stared at the board for a full minute in stunned disbelief before toppling it in resignation. The hush was deafening. Even the female grandmaster who had dismissed Emily's presence at the start was forced to notice. She stood at a distance, arms folded, lips pressed tight as Emily's name rose higher in the bracket. People began approaching her more often in hallways, trying to gauge who she was. "Are you an instructor from Europe?" asked one. She shook her head. Another, presumably an agent or sponsor, offered a handshake and asked about her interest in promotions. She simply smiled apologetically and declined. In the cafeteria, a pair of teenage prodigies stared at her from across the room, whispering among themselves that her style of play seemed archaic, referencing lines none of them recognized. One teen mustered the courage to ask how she'd learned chess. Emily answered with a neutral half-smile, then excused herself without elaborating. The next day, tension soared. The bracket revealed that Emily would face a well-known international grandmaster, a potential candidate for the final. This was the same man who had joked about her belonging in the spectator section. A hush preceded their match as a growing crowd lined up to see if she could topple a truly elite name. The grandmaster arrived exuding confidence in his polished shoes and designer watch. He sat with perfect posture, waited for Emily to arrive, then offered a condescending nod. "So you're the new wonder," he said, eyeing her with the faintest sneer. She gave the slightest bow in return, set up her side of the board, and pressed the clock when instructed. The grandmaster opened with a sophisticated system known for flattening lesser players under positional pressure. Emily's response, small, quiet moves that, again, confounded watchers. She developed her pieces to unremarkable squares, never challenged the center in a flashy manner. In the audience, a commentator mumbled into a microphone that she seemed to invite the grandmaster to overextend. On the board, he advanced pawns confidently, ready to break through any meager defense. Yet on move 18, she executed a knight maneuver that exploited a subtle gap in his lines. He froze, recalculating, then advanced another pawn to maintain pressure. She responded with an unobtrusive bishop shift that locked him out of half the board. Grumbling, he attempted a direct assault, sacrificing material to open her king's position. She let him. 2 moves later, she pinned his queen to his rook. Eyes widened all around. In a series of forcing moves, the grandmaster's position collapsed. Resignation came quickly afterward. The tournament hall erupted with shock. Some watchers clapped spontaneously, while others stood in near-silent awe. The grandmaster rose from his chair, frustration etched on his features. A few staff members stammered about verifying results. The female grandmaster stared with narrowed eyes as if willing Emily to reveal some hidden trick. Emily simply recorded the final move, gathered her bag, and stepped away. A handful of press folks tried to block her path with cameras asking questions, but she bowed her head politely and skirted around them. Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of a row of black and white photos, historic matches, once the pinnacle of American chess. She paused only briefly, then pushed out into the corridor as a mild hush accompanied her exit. During the break, rumors flew that the Federation officials planned to grill her, suspecting an elaborate cheat or at least demanding her background. Indeed, a pair of them cornered her in a side room. They scanned her with a handheld device, found no electronics. They flipped through her meager registration documents, found only the basics. She answered a few questions in the same calm manner, revealing no dramatic backstory. Then, lacking any grounds to disqualify her, they let her go. A volunteer outside the room had listened to muffled bits of conversation and whispered to a friend that no one could find any official rating or sponsor attached to Emily's name. The friend shook his head in wonder. With the final set for the next day, tension hit a fever pitch. Emily's name was locked in. The reigning national champion, a man known for dominating the American scene and for an arrogance that rivaled his skill, would face her. He had already brushed off questions about her lucky streak, telling the press he'd show the difference between a real champion and a fluke. The morning of the final, camera crews descended on the main stage, bright lights shining on the long table reserved for the deciding match. Spectators filled every seat, some carrying small chessboards to analyze the opening as it happened. The champion arrived in a stylish suit, accompanied by a throng of admirers and tournament officials. Emily showed up alone, adjusting her plastic glasses at the door, glancing around as if searching for a place to hang her jacket. The two sat across from each other, cameras flashing incessantly. The champion gave her a cursory handshake, then addressed the onlookers. "Let's begin," he said, voice carrying a hint of showmanship. The referee signaled the start. The champion moved a central pawn, one of his trademark openings that had crushed many a strong player. Emily responded with a quiet pawn push that looked old-fashioned, borderline naive. The champion smirked and escalated quickly, deploying a bishop and knight in a double-threat pattern. Observers leaned forward. This was a known system that typically spelled doom for anyone unprepared. Emily remained expressionless. Move after move, she slid her pieces into positions that the untrained eye would find unremarkable. The champion advanced deeper, flipping his knights into vantage points that threatened forks and pins. A few gasps came from watchers who recognized the champion's skill. It seemed unstoppable. But as the game crossed the 20th move, Emily made a small bishop move that severed the champion's plan. She then advanced a rook, controlling a file he had neglected. The champion realized too late that his aggression had left weaknesses behind. He tried a big sacrifice, a hallmark move that had won him many titles. Emily calmly exchanged pieces in a sequence that left him open to a discovered check. The champion stared at the board, disbelief etched on his face. Two more precise moves from Emily, and she'd orchestrated a forced mate. Checkmate arrived at move 47. The champion's jaw tightened. Emily waited, gaze lowered as he extended his hand. She accepted, no triumphant grin on her face, just a small nod. The crowd exploded in applause, many leaping to their feet. Cameras spun to capture every angle of the board. Officials swarmed forward, confirming the result. The champion sank back in his chair, eyes distant, while Emily rose and gathered her bag. The head judge approached with a microphone, voice trembling. He announced Emily Walker as the new national professional chess champion. Shouts, cheers, and frantic energy rippled throughout the hall. People who'd witnessed the entire event looked in awe at the unassuming figure at the center of the storm. Then, as the judge fought to regain quiet, he divulged a revelation that stopped everyone cold. Emily, he explained, had once been a youth chess champion at 14, a name revered in junior circuits. She had vanished from the scene without explanation, leaving behind a record of undefeated matches. Shockwaves rippled. Some in the crowd recalled an old story about a female prodigy who abruptly disappeared. The female grandmaster who had mocked Emily that first day swallowed, recalling seeing a photo of a teen champion long ago. It all clicked into place like a final puzzle piece. Moments later, the people who had belittled Emily lined up to shake her hand. The flamboyant champion, still reeling, offered a quiet apology. She accepted each gesture with calm courtesy. The American grandmaster, who had snidely offered to seat her in the spectator section, mumbled something about misjudging appearances. Emily only inclined her head as if no apology was needed. A journalist pushed forward, microphone raised, seeking a triumphant quote. Emily spoke softly, words that hushed the crowd. Never judge a person by what they wear or how quietly they live. Intelligence, resilience, and passion don't need magic tricks or media. They speak for themselves. In the flurry of final photos, trophy presentations, and official forms, Emily seemed almost an afterthought. She signed what needed signing, turned down immediate interview requests, and slipped out to the foyer. A staff member hurried after her, stammering about a press conference. She listened politely, then shook her head. As she exited the tournament building, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. She paused a moment, glancing back at the tall glass doors. Inside, she could see the reflection of the hall where so many had mocked her. Now that same hall was alive with chatter about her being a phenomenon, a prodigy, a champion who played by her own rules. She lowered her gaze, letting a faint, unspoken memory pass across her expression, then waved down a taxi. A local newspaper scrounged up an older piece of data that she lived in rural Ohio, teaching chess to children at a small community center. A few days later, a reporter managed to catch her by phone. He asked if she planned to travel the professional circuit. She demurred, saying only that she was content to keep living quietly, helping others learn the game. When pressed for a final insight, she repeated a simple phrase: be yourself. Sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful. The reporter noted that her voice remained calm, unwavering, as if she had found a place in life that all the acclaim couldn't touch. The chess world predictably erupted with speculation about how she'd fare on the global stage or whether she'd accept sponsorships. Meanwhile, top players reviewed her matches, perplexed at the hidden depth behind her calm, old-school approach. Many realized she'd outmaneuvered them with quiet moves that looked harmless yet formed unstoppable endgames. Some recognized her style might have been honed through old texts or personal study, far from typical training centers. Others posited that her wealthy family might have provided private coaching from legendary masters. No official records confirmed that, and Emily never elaborated. In a small chess forum, a user claimed to have met Emily once at a local library in Ohio, where she ran free tutorials for kids. The user described her as a polite, soft-spoken woman with no trace of ego. More stories cropped up, a handful of children in rural areas receiving brand-new chess sets she'd donated anonymously. It seemed she had resources, someone that unassuming might have come from a powerful background, but she never brandished it as a shield or weapon. She simply lived as she wished. Time marched on, but the legend of Emily Walker's victory at the National Professional Chess Championship did not fade. For those who had ridiculed her, it remained a lesson in humility. Appearances can betray us, and the quietest among us might hold mastery beyond imagining. The female grandmaster who sneered first eventually confided to a colleague that seeing Emily's final checkmate had shaken her. She realized she had become the kind of shallow critic she'd once despised. Others who had scorned Emily found themselves on the defensive in interviews explaining why they had doubted her so vehemently. In the tournament's aftermath, the official website updated the records, placing Emily's name in bold as the champion. A photo of her receiving the trophy was posted, though in it she looked slightly uncomfortable under the bright lights. On the discussion boards, players dissected her games, move by move, marveling at the pattern-like precision. Some advanced a theory that she'd learned from older coaches who had passed on knowledge from a classical Soviet tradition. Others insisted she must have discovered an unusual library of historical chess manuscripts, and a few romantic souls claimed she had raw talent that needed no teacher, a near mystical gift. Through all the speculation, Emily herself gave no new interviews. A friend of hers, so a rumor said, told a local official in Ohio that Emily was focusing on teaching and had no immediate desire for the professional circuit's hustle. She had found contentment among the farmland, the local library, and a small circle of kids eager to play. In a part of the country that rarely saw big names or grand events, she brought a world-class skill with a quiet, humble presence that seemed out of sync with modern publicity. Looking back on the day it all started, many recalled how she entered the hall with that worn bag, wearing a pale gray shirt and cheap glasses. They remembered the barrage of insults, the shrugs, the scorn. They replayed in their minds the spectacle of her toppling champion after champion, each with a style so unshowy that it looked almost too simple until the final blow. They recounted how at the end her only public statement was to caution against judging by appearances. That single line, calm yet piercing, rang in interviews and commentaries for weeks afterward. The wealth and power from her background never surfaced in the official narratives. Perhaps she chose not to mention it, seeing no reason to overshadow her love for the game with hints of privilege. Perhaps that sense of discipline and dignity was why she had disappeared from the chess world years before. No one truly knew. She never explained what led her to abandon a blossoming youth champion career, or how she kept her skills honed in isolation. If asked, she would tilt her head in polite silence, letting the question hang. People read all sorts of answers into that silence: heartbreak, family commitments, disinterest in fame. All were plausible, none confirmed. Every so often, a flashback of her teen years surfaced in the recollection of an older coach or a dusty newspaper article. They spoke of a prodigy who had soared through national youth events, defeating older players with uncanny endgame technique. Then, without warning, she vanished from the rankings. Some said she was traveling the world, others said she disliked the spotlight. In the end, none of it changed the fact that she had returned that day in Chicago to deliver a performance for the ages. Those who had met her recognized a pattern in her interactions. She seldom spoke more than necessary, never engaged in petty arguments. If someone insulted her, she merely bowed or nodded as if acknowledging they had a right to an opinion. Yet behind that silent courtesy, she possessed an unbreakable sense of self, a personal code that refused to be rattled by outside judgments. It was something the camera lenses could never capture fully, but everyone who encountered her felt it. In the hush of the final moments of that championship day after the trophy was handed over, one more official asked for a direct statement. She repeated her line about not judging someone by their outward show. Then she offered a fleeting smile. "Be yourself," she added softly. "Sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful." That was all. No further elaboration. She gathered her bag and stepped away, leaving the official to stand there, microphone in hand, uncertain how to respond. When she arrived back in Ohio, the local community center that hosted her small chess club greeted her with a modest banner that read, "Congratulations." A handful of children, eyes shining, asked if she really was the new national champion. She nodded, patted one on the shoulder, and said she'd be resuming their lessons next week. There was no party, no press. She resumed her routine, preparing puzzle sheets and organizing small in-house tournaments for the kids. Occasionally, a phone call from a big sponsor or chess federation official would come in, but she rarely spoke for long, politely declining high-profile offers. Over time, the fierce excitement around her victory settled. A new champion emerged the following year, someone else with a big sponsor and a media-friendly personality. People in the chess world moved on to the next headlines, the next big tournament. But for those who had been there, who had seen her cut through the ranks with silent grace, the memory never dulled. They remembered how, in a single unstoppable run, she redefined how they saw the game, how they saw humility, and how they saw each other. Some admitted privately that they grew kinder to newcomers. Others focused more on building solid fundamentals, emulating her quiet, methodical approach. Some months later, a well-known coach gave a lecture to advanced students and told them that Emily Walker's performance was the epitome of class focusing on skill, not bravado. He noted that she proved no one can tell a person's worth by glancing at their shoes or by checking a rating list. The students, enthralled, asked if he believed she'd return to defend her title. He shrugged, saying a mind like hers didn't need external validation. She could do as she pleased. A hush fell among them, echoing the hush that had fallen in the Chicago hall at her final checkmate. Years would pass. In the corners of chess forums, someone would mention the name Emily Walker, and others would recall that final match where she sacrificed a knight on move 47, turning the champion's unstoppable assault into a humiliating defeat. They'd recall the stunned faces of those who had mocked her, the wave of apologies, and her calm acceptance of it all. They'd share how in an era of constant showmanship, she reminded the world that quiet, disciplined passion can outshine the brightest lights. And so the story lingered even for those who had only heard it secondhand. A simple woman from rural Ohio wearing plastic-framed glasses and carrying a frayed canvas bag, stepping into the highest tier of professional chess with no rank, no fanfare, only to leave with a trophy and a lesson. She taught them that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it appears in the hush before a key move, or in the gentle voice that chooses restraint over boastfulness. Sometimes it arrives in a battered shirt and dusty shoes, unstoppable. If anyone asked her directly or begged for a deeper explanation, she would repeat that line she'd given the press. Never judge a person by what they wear or how quietly they live. Intelligence, resilience, and passion don't need magic tricks or media. They speak for themselves. She never once claimed to be more than she was. She never gloated. She never used her hidden wealth or background to crush her adversaries socially or financially. She let them see her skill unadorned, that she must have believed was enough. In the final hush as she returned to her life, the parted curtains of the tournament hall closed behind her. The watchers who had ridiculed her realized their folly too late. The wealthy and the privileged who had assumed she was nobody felt the sting of their shallow judgments. And the cameras that had once ignored her scrambled to capture a final glimpse as she left, yet all they could show was her calm profile, a fleeting image of someone who hadn't needed them in the first place. Be yourself. Sometimes the simplest things are the most powerful. 4 quiet lines that lingered long after her footsteps faded from that shining hall, a gentle whisper echoing through the minds of those who needed to hear it most.